So our presentation is modern cryptography, keeping those dastardly hackers at bay. My name is Bailey Matthias.
I'm Connor Shug.
I'm Hemant Vikash.
And I'm Jacob McCleary.
Modern cryptography is the study of hiding and securing information, and how it does is through the creation of algorithms, and it's necessary for secure communication. What modern cryptography involves is that there's unencrypted data called plaintext, which is encrypted into ciphertext, and these encryption and decryption processes use some sort of key. There are three types of algorithms. There's secret key cryptography called symmetric encryption, public key cryptography called asymmetric encryption, and hash functions. So in secret key cryptography, the sender and receiver both have the same key. A key aspect of this is that you have to ensure the secret key is distributed securely, because if a third party gets a hold on this key, it can also decrypt that same ciphertext. Secret key cryptography is split into two types, block ciphers and stream ciphers. All that block ciphers are is that they encrypt one data block at a time with the same key. And as shown here, one of the popular block ciphers is the Advanced Encryption Standard, AES. What stream ciphers do is that they operate on one element at a time with a process that constantly changes the key being used, and this is called the key stream. The key stream is periodic, so the key will eventually repeat, but what can happen is that with the key always changing, this can propagate errors. Algorithm is called public key cryptography. This uses two separate keys, one for encryption called the public key and one for decryption called the private key. Public key cryptography is dependent on what is called one-way functions. So, for example, it's easy to multiply something, but it's very hard to factor a number to go the other way. Some examples of public key cryptography are RSA, ECC, and Diffie-Hellman, and we'll go more in depth in RSA.
Hash functions are the next step up from standard cryptography. These encryption methods have no possible way of reverse engineering, so they can't be decrypted. Two of the most common hashing algorithms in use today are message direct and secure hash algorithm. MD, or message direct, takes strings of varying length and turns them into a 120-bit hash value. These can be designed for systems with limited memory and in favor of speed. SHA, or secure hashing algorithm, is a more secure method of hashing that can produce varying lengths of hash values, from 160 bits to 512 bits. This is often used when storing sensitive information. There are four main goals in the field of cryptography to ensure the protection of data. 1. Confidentiality, keeping sensitive information in the right hands and away from harm. 2. Data integrity, being able to encrypt and protect data while keeping it accurate so its original values aren't tampered with. 3. Authentication, double-checking with a receiver or a sender of data that they're the correct person for the job. And 4. Non-repudiation, the idea that someone cannot deny the validity of secure information. A great example of a real-world problem with encryption of data is password storage. Every day, millions of passwords on thousands of websites must be accessed and updated. It's common practice for these to be done through a database. This produces a problem because when a hacker can gain access to this database, sensitive information can be stolen and accounts can be lost. So, how are these passwords stored? And are they safe? This depends on how they're stored. As discussed earlier, there are several different ways to encrypt data, and some are much safer than others. There are a variety of storage techniques that can be used to store passwords, but only some are truly secure. Plaintext, for example, is extremely unsafe, as any passwords stored in plaintext aren't encrypted in any way. Leaks would be catastrophic, as no work would have to be done to steal user accounts. The encryption of passwords is certainly an improvement, no matter what encryption is used. Some are definitely better than others, but they all share the same weakness: they can be reverse engineered. The hashing of passwords is a drastic improvement. This is a form of random encryption that can't be reversed. Passwords aren't stored themselves in the database, their hashes are. When the user logs in, their password is converted to the hash using the same algorithm and compared with what was stored in the database. Lastly, hashing with salt is even more effective. Salting is the action of adding a random string of characters somewhere around the password before it's hashed. Both hashing and hashing with salt is the most common way to store passwords online, as it's very secure and hard to break. A great example of why this problem is so important today is LinkedIn's password hacking of 2012. Due to their password storage hashing without salt, the database was breached and the algorithm was discovered by hackers. The source of this problem was the lack of salt. When it comes to encryption, especially of sensitive data, the extra step can really go a long way.
Problem that we encounter with encryption is delayed access. For example, let's take public key encryption. It has a lot of mathematical computation that makes access of information harder and slower because of encrypting the data. For example, let's take the slideshow. The, the green key resembles the public key while the gray one resembles the private key. Basically, a plain text is passed through a public key and it's changed into a encrypted data form. The encrypted data form is sent through the private key that each and every individual owns, and it's converted back to plain text, which the person can read. Know that the higher level of security that we need, the slower it is going to be to access that information. Real world example of why encryption makes it harder for us to access information. Proton Mail uses end to end encryption to send information to its users. It sends a link to a secure message stored in one of ProtonMail's own servers instead of actually sending the email to the recipient. This becomes difficult when it comes to using and accessing information on the service.
RSA is the most popular algorithm for commercial applications and is also one of the first public key crypto systems. It is an example of asymmetric cryptography, and it derives its name from the developers Ron Rivest, Adi Shamir, and Leonard Adelman, who created it in 1978. The encryption key for RSA is public, while the decryption key is private. One drawback of RSA is that it is a relatively slow application. For RSA, the public key is composed of the RSA modulus and the public exponent. The RSA modulus, represented by n, is the product of two randomly generated prime numbers, p and q, of approximately the same bit length. The public exponent, represented by e, must satisfy the following. E is greater than 1 but less than phi, and the greatest common denominator of e and phi is where phi is equal to p minus 1 times q minus 1. The private key d is called the private exponent and must satisfy d is greater than 1 and less than phi, and ed equals modulus of phi. RSA's encryption, decryption, signature, and verification are based on the Euler's theorem identity, defined as m to the power of ed equals m times mod n for an integer m. Given a plain text file, the ciphertext will be generated from the plain text file m to the power of e mod n. And then with that plain text, you would decrypt it by c to the power of d times mod n. One of the main applications of RSA is the securing of websites. It's generally shown as HTTPS preceding the URL of the website. The S in this indicates that this is a secure website. Another example of RSA is in ExpressVPN, as ExpressVPN uses a RSA certificate identified by the hashing algorithm SHA 512 of the SH2 family. The RSA key belonging to the certificate is 4096 bits long. Our last example of RSA is OpenSSL, as OpenSSL is a cryptography library that provides support for RSA and also a generation algorithm of RSA keys through the command line. Congratulations, you're now cryptography experts.